Hi, I'm Joe Crabtree from joecrabtree.com, and in this lesson I want to talk about my typical approach to practice and the way I approach getting better at things. There are lots of things out there, plenty of videos on YouTube, VHS, DVD, drum books. There's a huge amount of information out there about grooves and fills that you could potentially play. And it's usually not that difficult to work with some of these things and get to the stage where you can play them. And what I'm interested in is what's the difference between playing something and playing something well. I think it comes down to the accuracy, so the timing of the actual notes, the dynamic volume of the notes that you're playing, and the sound that you get out of the drums. They are the three main things. And usually, if something that you're playing isn't quite sounding right and it's not grooving, it's probably down to one of those three things. So what I'm interested in is how can you get better at that? Because you might sit and play a groove for an hour and you really don't feel like it, by the end of it, it's sounding any better than it was at the beginning. So how do you improve something that you can already play to make it better? That's what I want to talk about. So the first thing to understand is that the mechanics of playing the drums, the kind of, your hands moving the sticks and making them do what they need to do to play grooves, is something that happens essentially in muscle memory. So if you can remember back to when you first started playing the drums, everything felt really awkward, okay? And if you don't remember how that felt, then take a groove that you can play right-handed, and try and play it left-handed. It's hard, okay? So you know in your head what you want to come out, but when you suddenly switch around, it gives you an idea of what it used to feel like. And unless you've worked on things left-handed a lot, then it's going to feel uncomfortable. So if I slowed it right down, I would be able to play that first groove with, left-handed lead, but it wouldn't sound as good and it wouldn't feel comfortable, and the feeling is a really important part of this. So you have what I call a comfort gauge. If you take something really easy like this, make a note of how easy that feels to play on a scale of, say, 1 to 10. And then when you play it left-hand lead, does it feel as easy or does it feel more difficult? You'll notice probably that the left hand just doesn't feel as good playing the hi-hat, and things don't quite seem to be as in time when you're playing it left-handed. And obviously that's primarily because you spent a lot less time playing the drums this way around, but there's no inherent reason that it should be more difficult to do that, apart from the fact that you haven't put the time in. And certain motions, for playing things like this, that's a motion. It's not just 3 single strokes in a row. You have to learn, your hand has to learn how to make the stick play those 3 strokes perfectly in time and then stop. It's a stopping motion with some continuity in the middle. So it's not the same as just going 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It's a motion, da-da-da, da-da-da, that my right hand has learned and my left hand can do, but it's not as comfortable with. There's a lot of extra unnecessary effort and tension in my left hand. So in order to make the grooves and fills feel more comfortable and sound more accurate and just be easier to play, we need to focus on the technique and the kind of micro movements, the things that we have to build into muscle memory. So that's primarily what I'm going to cover in the rest of this lesson. The first thing to realize is that your brain can only focus on one thing at a time. It's like being in a dark room and shining a torch around. You can only look at whatever the torch is pointing at. So in this context, if you're playing a groove, the simple groove, if you want to know, for example, if your shoulders are tense, you have to ask that question. If you're just playing, you won't notice that your shoulders are tense until you go, "Are my shoulders tense?" And then you go, Yes, they are. So then you can kind of relax them and you continue playing. And so what I like to do is whenever there are things that I think my shoulders ought to be relaxed and I should be breathing naturally, and my left hand, there shouldn't be tension in my upper arm, this should feel comfortable. Anything that I think is something that ought to be the case for playing in a relaxed and efficient manner, that is something that I want to be able to check for. So I'll have a list, and you can pin that list up on the wall, and when you're playing whatever it is that you're working on, you can glance up at that list and go, okay, item 1, are my shoulders tense? Ask yourself, are your shoulders tense? If they are, relax them. Item 2, am I breathing naturally or am I holding my breath? So check on that and then move on. And having the list means that you don't have to, on top of playing all this stuff, remember what the things are that you're supposed to be checking up on. So I find that's a really useful tool for basically ironing out problems that you know about, remembering to check to see if they're there and then doing something about it. We're going to need to break things down because playing even a single stroke roll, even this, is too complex to focus on the details that are going to make this feel easy to play and sound good. Because there's already 2 motions going on that have to be synchronized up in a certain way. So that doesn't allow you to figure out if your right hand technique is good and your left hand technique is good, and if both things are comfortable and natural. So we have to strip it down to the bare minimum. So just single strokes with your right hand. So you might sit and play this for 10 minutes, 5-10 minutes, and start asking questions about how comfortable this feels and if there's different ways you can hold the stick, whether the stick is making a nice smooth movement, and if there's something in here that feels uncomfortable or unnatural, or there's tension, or the stick isn't bouncing freely, then this is where you can do something about it. But it could take a lot of time. It could take 10 minutes of this a day for a week or so until you start to really notice improvements. But those things won't come if you're always playing fast single stroke rolls. You need to really focus in on the details. So presumably one of your hands is better than the other. So your weak hand, you can do the same thing with. And compare the feeling of your good hand and your weak hand at this level. You also need to know what it is that you're trying to play. So what I mean by that is if you have a click and you're playing 16th notes, single stroke rolls, the right hand part of this is easier than both together. That's an easier thing to play. However, the left hand part on its own is more difficult than playing both together, because typically in a single stroke roll, your left hand just fills the gaps of your right hand. So your left hand relies on your right hand as a crutch to play its part. So usually what happens if you've never tried this before is the right hand will be on the click, and when you take the right hand away, it's hard to position this because you don't know how it should sound against the click. Because that click is happening when the stick is up here. There's nothing to lock into. So you need to know what it sounds like. 1 E and A, 2 E and A, 3 E and A, 4 E and A to play those notes. Now, more difficult than that would be 16th triplets. Again, the right hand part of this is just triplets, locking in with the click, but the left hand part is off the click. So again, it's useful to know how that sounds and to be able to play that by itself against the click. Now, I guarantee if you haven't done this before, it's going to feel difficult to begin with, but it's really useful because then when you're playing this and you want the left hand to be louder, you know how that is supposed to sound against the click. It's not just filling in the holes, you know what both of your limbs are doing. So breaking it down to the individual limbs and what they are required to play in a pattern is a really good way to find out if there are any issues there. You want to be aware that playing multiple strokes in a row is different to playing single strokes all joined together. So this and this are two different things because this is cyclical. So you've got to learn how one joins into another, and this you have to start and stop. So you need to have decided what your hand's going to do between strokes. Is it going to be up here or is it going to weigh it down there? These are all questions that you need to ask. And then a third type is what I kind of call broken cycles. Something like this is a motion that your hand needs to learn. How do you play a few strokes in a row and then stop? How do you deal with that? And these are the kind of things that crop up in grooves. So that right hand part, dig-a-ding, 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 that's a motion that my right hand has learned over time. My left hand, which is just used to playing this, bap, bap, that's what this does most of the time. Left hand hasn't developed a motion to play dig-a-ding, dig-a-ding, dig. Well, it has because I've worked on it a little bit, but maybe yours hasn't. So if you have a groove that involves something like that, I'm making stuff up here, but if you have a groove that involves a left hand playing that kind of motion, and you're just playing that groove over and over again, banging your head against a brick wall, wondering why it's not sounding right, is probably just because your left hand is not comfortable playing that sequence of notes and that motion. So you want to strip it right down to that left hand motion and work on that at a slow tempo where it feels comfortable, but a tempo that's fast enough so that the motions are joined together. Because if you play really slowly, that's not joined together. That is joined together. So it's the equivalent if you're bouncing a basketball, not having to catch it at the top. So it's fast enough so that those things are going to join together. Bounce, bounce, catch, bounce, bounce, catch. So one exercise that I think is really useful to work on is to set the metronome at, say, 100 BPM and play quarter notes with your right hand at a low dynamic level, and make a note of how easy this is on your comfort gauge. Is it really difficult? And is there a lot of tension there, which would be like a 1? Or is it really easy and you can perfectly lock in with the click all of the time and it feels relaxed and natural, which would be a 10. So I'm probably an 8 or something because I don't nail the click all the time, and I'm sure there are ways that this could be even more relaxed. And then your left hand. So is that the same as your right hand? I'm rushing a little here. So comfort-wise, is it the same as your right hand, or is it less comfortable than your right hand? And if it's less comfortable, then why? So you want to shine this torch of consciousness and ask what's going on. And when it comes to hand technique, you can't just say, how does it feel? Because that's too broad a question. You know, what's the difference between my right hand and my left hand? That's hard. It's a hard question to answer because there will be lots of subtle differences. So I like to have on my checklist things like, can I feel the stick on the back of my hand? Is the stick wobbling about in my hand? Do I feel the tips, where on these fingers am I feeling the contact with the stick? Now I find for me that the tips of my right fingers would be on the stick, but with my left hand, it was more like this and there was less control there. But I think with my left hand, I had to just feel like I was grabbing it more to stop it doing what I didn't want it to do. But the point here is that you need to ask very specific questions. So where do I feel the stick with my middle finger, with my ring finger, with my little finger? Is it moving in the hand? Is the tip of the stick moving in the same way for the left hand as the right hand? Am I squeezing with my thumb? So you want this to be as relaxed and natural as possible. And I'm telling you, spending 10 minutes doing this with your left hand, you will notice where there's unnecessary tension. So then you do the same thing with eighth notes and compare to your left hand with your comfort gauge, and then these broken 16th patterns. Now, you might find that with your left hand you tend to be a little late or a little early with these patterns, and this is the kind of subtle detail that in the context of a groove you will be unaware of why it's not working. But if you break it right down to this, you might just find that, wow, okay, I can't play that accurately and in a relaxed way. And if that's the case, then whenever that occurs in a groove, it's not going to be natural and relaxed and in time, and that is what is going to make your groove sound off. So, you know, we're breaking it down to this very minimalistic level to figure out how your hand is dealing with what you're asking it to deal with. One thing that can throw off hand technique is if your arm and wrist and fingers aren't in sync. So, you know, your forearm, for example, can move from the elbow, your wrist can move here, and your fingers can move like that or like this. So that's 3 different pivot points that you have in your arm. Now, if they are not working together, that can cause some problems. Think about it. If your arm goes up when your wrist goes down, then you don't get a stroke. Now, that's an exaggerated example, but if your arm went up just a little bit when your wrist went down, then you would get a kind of weak stroke. Now, this is what happens if you try to play just from the wrists and you try and not use your forearm at all. There's a natural reaction to your wrist going down, which is that something has to go up. Now, if you're trying to hold it still here, then there's going to be unnecessary tension in your upper arm to hold that there. And it probably will still go up a little bit, and this is going to feel really awkward. What's better is for your forearm to work with your wrist and both of those things to come down a little bit. That's a lot more relaxed to have this come down and that go down than one of them to go up. Same with the fingers. If the fingers are going to snap on the stick, you want that to be in conjunction with the wrist going down, because if they snap and the wrist goes up and the forearm goes up, then you don't get a stroke. So forearm, wrist and fingers all working together gives you a nice stroke on here. So this is opening up this idea of a larger motion. You have what your fingers and your wrist want to do and what the forearm is doing. Let's put this in context of a groove. Something like this, for example. That, I'm sure you would agree, is pretty similar to this. So, if you don't notice the difference between those things, obviously you probably realize that the first one, I was accenting all the eighth notes, and the second one, I was accenting the quarter notes. But there's a really fundamental difference in this that maybe in such a simple pattern wouldn't be an issue, but when this same thing crops up in more complex grooves, it's going to be an issue. And that is that the synchronization between the limbs is different in those two grooves. So the snare drum doesn't change, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and that's always on a down stroke. Let's think of the right hand, down, 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 the larger motion of the arm here. So down, down, both together, down, 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 down. And the bass drum, down, 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 it's always with the down, 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 down. Now, if you change the right hand motion to play down, up, look at what the arm's doing, down, up, instead of down, 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 then we now have a different dance to do between the right hand and the bass drum. Because if the leg is going down, 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 and the arm is going down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, then you have this, down, up, down, up, down, down. So now the bass drum has to play a downstroke when the right hand is playing an upstroke. And so if that isn't something that feels comfortable, playing a heavy downstroke on the bass drum when you're playing an upstroke on the hand, then that groove is going to feel uncomfortable. And this is one of those hidden things that it's very hard to realize is there until you really break down a pattern and figure out how everything synchronizes with everything else. So you can then come up with exercises to work on making this more comfortable, and you're basically then focusing on every time there's an upstroke and something going down, making sure that those two things are going together in a nice way, and you're not playing this harder because you're playing the bass drum harder. Does that make sense? This might be more recognizable if you accent the offbeats. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, because then all the things that were on the downstroke before are now on an upstroke. So the backbeat, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. So 1, 2. You have to have this going up and this going down. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So that's a totally different dance that you're dancing when you're playing the drums, and these things have to be able to line up in a certain way. It's not just dun, 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 dun. The larger motions overlap. So that's something to keep in mind when you're working on grooves. Figure out how each limb and its part lines up with the other limbs, and really give yourself landmarks of, because I said you can only focus on one thing at once, so that one thing can be a group of, okay, this is going to be up and that's down, so you focus on that as a thing, okay? And you focus on that as a thing. So that motion, you learn that as a thing on its own, as a single thing that you can focus on when you're playing, and that will help to make this whole thing feel comfortable because you're locking those two things in place. It's similar to this. There's an exercise, a little challenge, which is to draw a square with your right hand and a circle with your left hand. So those two things you can do very easily individually, but when you try and do them together, it gets really tricky because they want to both do the same thing. You have to tell your limbs what to do. So the way that I would learn to do this is your right hand goes from here to here while your left hand does an arc. And then your right hand goes from here to here while your left hand does an arc around there. And then your right hand goes from here to here where your left hand does an arc like that. And then this. Okay? Here's another one. Go clockwise away from your body with your right hand and go towards your body with this hand and try and put those together. It's another tricky one, but the way to do it is to think about how these things synchronize. Start at the top and then do an arc away, and they're going to meet at the bottom. So this is your landmark. And when you can do that, then you can start to have it feeling natural. And that's the same thing that's applying on the drums. You just have to find out how these things synchronize and then use those as focus points to help everything come together. So that's essentially the way I break things down and simplify them to make them, well, to basically try and find the sticking points and the things that are making my grooves not feel quite right. And then I will take something like this and I'll do this for 10 minutes. And if it feels uncomfortable or I can't quite get it, I'll slow the tempo down, and whatever tempo I choose, if I can do this and it feels easy, then I'll aim to play 16 in a row. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and if I can get to 16 without doing something that screws it up, then I'll increase the tempo by maybe 5 BPM, maybe 2 BPM. It depends on how fast you're going and how comfortable you're finding it. But you gradually work your way up and start slow. It's better to start slow and get it right, where you can give yourself a pat on the back, than to start too fast and get it wrong and feel like you've failed. And if you build the tempo up like that, then essentially every step of the way you've mastered it, and you find the tempo at which it becomes difficult, and then you can always come back to that tempo when you're working on it in the future. So that's a useful way of deciding when you can move on. So they are just a few of the things that I use when I'm breaking down grooves and I'm trying to find the problems and fix the problems in my playing. And you can use them with any groove, any feel, anything at all. Those tools work for making things feel more comfortable. So I hope you find that a useful lesson. Please leave comments below to let me know how you get on, and I'll see you in the next lesson.